Racist cop pulls over a black colonel by mistake. What happens next is shocking. Officer James Wilson sat in his patrol car, watching the quiet streets of Oak Ridge. The small town rarely saw much excitement, especially on Tuesday nights. James had grown up in a nearby village where everyone knew each other. His father, also a police officer, had taught him who belonged and who didn't. A dark sedan drove slowly through the wealthy neighborhood of Oak Ridge Heights. James narrowed his eyes. The car seemed too expensive for someone who didn't live here. He flipped on his lights and followed. Colonel Thomas Bennett noticed the flashing lights in his mirror and sighed deeply. After 23 years in the Army with 3 tours overseas and now working at the military headquarters, Thomas was simply driving home from a late meeting. He carefully pulled over and placed his hands where they could be seen on the steering wheel. James approached the vehicle with caution, hand resting near his weapon. "License and registration," he demanded without greeting. "May I ask why I've been stopped, officer?" Thomas asked in a calm, measured voice. "This vehicle was driving suspiciously in a residential area," James replied sharply. "Your papers now." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my inside jacket pocket," he explained clearly, moving with deliberate slowness that came from years of experience with such encounters. When James saw the military ID with colonel rank, his expression changed slightly. He studied the ID card and looked back at Thomas with confusion. "Colonel Bennett, from the Northern Military Base?" "Yes, officer. I'm heading home from work. Again, may I ask why I've been stopped?" Thomas maintained his composed manner. James shifted his weight uncomfortably. "We had reports of suspicious vehicles in the area tonight." "I've lived in this neighborhood for 7 years," Thomas explained. "My house is just around the corner on Maple Street." James glanced at the address, on the license, then back at Thomas's face. "Wait here," he ordered, returning to his patrol car. In his rearview mirror, Thomas watched the young officer make a call. These situations felt sadly familiar. Despite his uniform, his service medals, and his position, some things hadn't changed since he was a teenager. After several minutes, James returned to the car window. His posture had changed slightly. "You're free to go, Colonel," he said stiffly, handing back the documents. Thomas didn't start his engine. "Is that all?" he asked quietly. Something in his tone made James pause. For the first time that night, he truly looked at the man he'd pulled over. "Officer Wilson," Thomas said gently, reading the name badge. "We both know there were no reports of suspicious vehicles tonight. I drive this road every evening coming home from the base." James's face flushed red. He started to argue but stopped himself. "I have procedures I follow," he said defensively. "Do those procedures include stopping people who look like me when they drive through nice neighborhoods?" Thomas asked. His voice wasn't angry, just weary from years of similar encounters. James looked down at his boots. A lifetime of beliefs was hard to question in a single moment. "It's not that simple," James mumbled. "Nothing important ever is," Thomas agreed, "which is exactly why we need to talk about it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back. "I have a proposal for you." James expected anger or threats about reporting him. Instead, the colonel handed him the card with an address written on the back. "Sunday dinner at my house, 6 o'clock. My wife Mary makes an amazing roast beef. Come alone or bring someone you trust. Your choice." James took the card, speechless and confused. Thomas smiled slightly, started his car, and drove away, leaving Officer Wilson standing by the roadside wondering what had just happened. The end. A racist cop pulls over a black colonel by mistake. What happens next is shocking. 3 days passed. Officer James Wilson sat in his car outside the address Colonel Bennett had given him. The tidy brick house with flower boxes had a warm glow from inside. James had almost decided not to come. Then he'd spent another hour sitting in his driveway, debating. Now he had been parked outside the colonel's house for 15 minutes, gathering courage. Finally, James stepped out of his car. The cool evening air helped clear his head. He walked up to the front door and hesitated before ringing the doorbell. "Colonel." Thomas Bennett opened the door with a genuine smile. "Officer Wilson, I'm glad you came." He wore casual clothes, a simple sweater and trousers, looking very different from the uniformed military man from their first meeting. "I wasn't sure I should," James admitted. "But you did." "That shows character," Thomas replied, stepping aside. "Please, come in." James walked into a warm home filled with the smell of roast beef and fresh bread. Family photos lined the walls. Military awards sat next to children's art projects on shelves. A kind-faced woman appeared from the kitchen. "You must be Officer Wilson. I'm Mary Bennett." She wiped her hands on her apron and offered one to shake. "Dinner is almost ready." James had expected anger or a trap. Instead, he found himself sitting at a dining table across from Thomas, Mary, and their teenage daughter, Emma. The conversation started awkwardly with talk about the weather and town events. After the first course, Thomas gently steered the conversation. "James, I invited you here because I believe people can only understand each other when they break bread together." James put down his fork. "I want to say that I'm sorry about the other night. I made a mistake." Thomas nodded. "We all make mistakes. The question is what we learn from them." He took a sip of water. "Tell me about yourself, James. Why did you become a police officer?" The question surprised James. He found himself talking about growing up with his father, also a policeman, about wanting to protect people, about feeling scared sometimes on the job, never knowing what might happen. Thomas listened carefully. Then he shared stories of his own, growing up poor in a rough neighborhood, joining the army to find direction, facing danger in war zones and still getting pulled over when driving through certain neighborhoods at home. "I've served this country for over 20 years, Thomas said quietly. "I've led hundreds of soldiers from every background, yet in my own country, I'm often seen as a threat first, a citizen second." Mary spoke up then. "We don't blame you personally. James, you're part of a bigger system. But systems only change when people inside them decide to be different." Emma, their daughter, finally spoke. "Last year at school, the police came for a safety talk. All my friends were excited. I was just scared. Dad had to explain to me why." James felt something shift inside him. These weren't angry accusations. This was a family sharing their truth, inviting him to see the world through their eyes. As Mary brought out dessert, Thomas made a suggestion. "James, I have an idea. What if we created a program to connect police officers with military veterans? People who serve our community in different ways, learning from each other?" "What kind of program?" James asked, curious despite himself. "Monthly dinners like this one, joint training sessions, community service projects, breaking down walls, by building relationships," Thomas explained. "Would you help me start it?" James looked around the table at these people who had welcomed him into their home despite having every reason not to. "Yes," he said simply. "I would." As the evening ended, Thomas walked James to the door. "Same time next Sunday? Bring a colleague, if you'd like." James nodded, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I know just who to bring." The end. Racist cop pulls over a black colonel by mistake. What happens next is shocking. 1 month later, James Wilson walked into the community center with a nervous smile. Behind him came 3 other police officers, Bill Thompson, Richard Moore, and Lisa Edwards. They all wore civilian clothes but carried themselves with the same cautious posture that marked them as law enforcement. Colonel Thomas Bennett greeted them at the door. "Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming." He led them into a meeting room where 5 military veterans waited. The veterans stood as the officers entered, both groups sizing each other up with professional interest. Thomas cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first official meeting of the Bridge program. I believe we all serve the same community but rarely speak to each other. Today we change that." The room felt tense at first. Nobody quite knew what to say. Thomas had prepared for this and brought out a simple activity. Each person would share one challenge they faced in their work and one thing they loved about it. Richard, the oldest police officer, went first. Hardest part of my job is never knowing if I'll come home at night. Best part is helping people on their worst days. A veteran named Peter nodded. In the Army, it was the same. Never knew what might happen, but we were there for each other. Family. Slowly, the ice broke. They discovered shared experiences, sleepless nights, post-traumatic stress, feeling misunderstood by civilians. They found common ground in commitment to service, love of country, and desire to protect others. Lisa, the female officer, admitted something difficult. I was taught certain things growing up, about people who didn't look like me. The job sometimes reinforces those ideas because we mainly see people on their worst days. Thomas nodded. And we sometimes see officers only when there's trouble, not as people with families and fears of their own. By the end of the evening, the group had made plans. They would meet monthly. They would organize ride-alongs, officers taking veterans on patrol, veterans showing officers around the base. They would create a joint community service project. They were leaving. James pulled Thomas aside. My captain wants to meet you. He's skeptical about this program, but curious. Thomas smiled. Skepticism is fine. It means he's thinking. Bring him next time. The following week, James and Thomas visited Oak Ridge Elementary School together. They spoke to young students about safety, respect, and working together. The children were fascinated by Thomas's medals and James's badge. One little boy raised his hand. Do you guys like each other? My dad says police and people like you don't get along. The room went quiet. James and Thomas exchanged glances. We're learning to be friends, James answered honestly. Sometimes people who seem different discover they're not so different after all. Thomas nodded. The uniform doesn't make the person. What matters is how we treat each other. After class, the principal approached them. We've never had a police officer and military officer visit together. The children will remember this. On the drive back, Thomas brought up something difficult. James, next week there's a community meeting about police tactics in minority neighborhoods. Would you come? Not to speak, just to listen. James gripped the steering wheel tighter. That sounds uncomfortable. Growth usually is, Thomas replied simply. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll come, but only if you sit next to me. Thomas smiled. Wouldn't have it any other way. The end racist cop pulls over a black colonel by mistake. What happens next is shocking. 3 months passed since the first bridge program meeting. The program had grown from just 10 people to over 30 regular members. They now met every 2 weeks in the larger community hall. Tonight was special. The town mayor and police chief were attending. James Wilson arrived early to help Thomas Bennett set up chairs. The two men had developed a genuine friendship over these months. They often met for coffee or brought their families together for weekend barbecues. Nervous about tonight? Thomas asked, noticing James kept checking his watch. A bit, James admitted. The chief still isn't completely sold on this program. He thinks it's taking officers away from real police work. Thomas nodded. Change always faces resistance, but the results speak for themselves. Since the program began, community complaints about police stops had dropped by nearly 30%. Officers involved in the bridge program reported feeling less stressed on patrol. Veterans said they felt more connected to their community after military service. People began arriving. Police officers and veterans now greeted each other with handshakes and backslaps like old friends. New faces appeared too, community members curious about the program they'd heard about. Chief George Williams arrived with the mayor. They sat at the back, watching with skeptical expressions as Thomas called the meeting to order. Tonight we're discussing how to expand our community outreach, Thomas announced. We've had success with our school visits and neighborhood cleanups. What should come next? Lisa Edwards, the female officer who had spoken honestly at the first meeting, raised her hand. I've been thinking about a youth program. Many kids in poorer neighborhoods only see police when something bad happens, and they don't know any military veterans except maybe family members. A veteran named Michael added, we could create a mentorship program. Take kids fishing, help with homework, teach life skills. The discussion grew lively. Ideas flowed freely. The tension that had marked early meetings was completely gone. During a break, the police chief approached Thomas. "I was prepared to shut this down when I heard about it," he admitted. "Thought it was some kind of anti-police group." "And now?" Thomas asked. "Now I'm wondering if we could expand it to the county level," Chief Williams replied. "My officers who attend are different, calmer, more thoughtful, better at their jobs." The mayor joined them. "The town council wants to give your program an award next month. Would you accept it?" Thomas smiled. "Only if Officer Wilson joins me on stage." This was built by both of us. Later that evening, a young police rookie named Robert approached James. "Sir, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead," James replied. "I grew up being taught certain things about different people," Robert said uncomfortably. "But what I see here doesn't match what I was taught. How did you change your thinking?" James thought carefully before answering. "I had to admit I was wrong. That's the hardest part. Then I had to listen more than I talked. And I had to be willing to feel uncomfortable while learning new truths." Robert nodded slowly. "My first day on patrol is next week. I'm scared of making mistakes." "Come to dinner at the Bennett's this Sunday," James offered. "Thomas helped me become a better officer. He can help you too." As the meeting ended, Thomas and James stood at the door saying goodbye to everyone. The chief stopped on his way out. "You two have started something important here," he said seriously. "Don't let it stop with this town." The end, racist cop pulls over a black colonel by mistake. What happens next is shocking. 1 year had passed since Officer James Wilson pulled over Colonel Thomas Bennett on that quiet Tuesday night. Today, hundreds of people filled the large conference hall at the Oak Ridge Community Center. Signs reading, "Bridge Program 1-year anniversary" hung on the walls. Photos showed police officers and veterans working together on various projects. Throughout the year, James stood nervously at the side of the stage, adjusting his tie. He had never been comfortable with public speaking. Thomas approached, looking calm in his dress uniform covered with medals. "Ready for this?" Thomas asked with a smile. "Not really," James admitted. "There are newspaper reporters here, even someone from national television." Thomas put a hand on his shoulder. "Just speak from the heart. Tell them what you've learned." The mayor stepped to the microphone and welcomed everyone. What began as a simple traffic stop has grown into something extraordinary. The Bridge program now operates in 12 towns across 3 states. Police departments report improved community relations. Veterans find purpose after service, and citizens feel safer knowing these two groups understand each other better. Thomas and James walked onto the stage together to loud applause. Thomas spoke first, telling the story of that night 1 year ago, how a simple dinner invitation changed everything. "We had a choice," Thomas explained. "Choose anger or choose connection. We chose connection." When it was James's turn, he took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd. His fellow officers sat in the front row, including Chief Williams, who nodded encouragingly. "I grew up believing certain things about people who didn't look like me," James began honestly. "Those beliefs affected how I did my job. Meeting Colonel Bennett and his family showed me I was wrong." His voice grew stronger. "This program taught me that good policing starts with seeing everyone as human first." After the speeches, people gathered in small groups, sharing stories and making plans. A police chief from a neighboring county talked with Thomas about starting the program there. A community college professor wanted to create a course based on the Bridge program's methods. Mary Bennett approached James with a newspaper. "Have you seen this?" she asked, showing him the headline. "From Traffic Stop to Transformation: How 2 Men Changed Their Community." James smiled. "Thomas did all the hard work. I just showed up for dinner." "No," Mary corrected him gently. "You had the courage to change. That's the hardest work of all." Across the room, young Officer Robert was talking to a group of teenagers about joining the police academy. Robert had become one of the program's strongest supporters, recruiting other young officers. As the event wound down, Thomas found James by the refreshment table. Remember that little boy at the elementary school? The one who asked if we liked each other? James nodded. I think about him often. His mother stopped me yesterday, Thomas said. Apparently, he told his class he wants to create programs that help people understand each other when he grows up. They looked around the room at police officers and veterans laughing together, at community members planning new projects, at reporters capturing the story of unlikely friendship changing an entire town. Not bad for a traffic stop gone wrong, James said with a smile. Thomas nodded. Sometimes the most important journeys start with a mistake. The end.